Something remarkable just happened in Ontario, something no one could quite make sense of at first. It looked like a loss, another manufacturing tragedy for Canada's auto belt. But as the dust settled, it turned out to be the beginning of a transformation few could have imagined. It started one cold morning in Brampton. More than 3,000 workers walked out of the Stellantis assembly plant, the same factory that had produced the Jeep Compass for years, knowing this might be their final shift. Within days, the company confirmed everyone's worst fears. Production was moving to Illinois. News broke fast. Stellantis to shift Jeep Compass production to Belvidere, Illinois. The headlines were brutal. Analysts warned of a hollowed-out auto sector. Local leaders called it betrayal. Ontario's premier, Doug Ford, didn't hold back either, blasting Washington's trade policies and calling it a stab in the back to Canadian industry. Politicians across the spectrum scrambled to respond. They talked about job losses, supply chain disruptions, and the slow death of Canada's manufacturing core. And they blamed the usual suspect, U.S. tariffs. But while the anger made for good television, something far more strategic was unfolding quietly behind closed doors. Ottawa wasn't preparing a protest. It was preparing a counterattack, a plan that would not only hold Stellantis accountable, but turn this apparent disaster into an opening for a new industrial era. Because what if this wasn't the end of Canadian auto manufacturing? What if it was the spark of a clean energy revolution? Behind the public outrage, the federal government took a different approach. Calm, quiet, and technical. While social media demanded boycotts and politicians shouted about fairness, Ottawa turned to something far more effective: contracts. Canada's message was clear: if you take public money, you deliver public value. Foreign Affairs Minister Mélanie Joly made it crystal clear: a commitment to produce in Canada wasn't a suggestion. It was a legal condition for receiving government support. It was a warning shot not just to Stellantis, but to every multinational watching from the sidelines. Behind the scenes, officials triggered what's known as a default by agreement clause, a legal mechanism that allowed Ottawa to pursue damages if Stellantis withdrew production without providing a comparable replacement. It was an elegant move, turning financial incentives into physical commitments. And timing was everything. Stellantis' withdrawal came just days after Washington announced new tariffs targeting Canadian-made vehicles, reigniting tensions across the border. Suddenly, Canada was at a crossroads: retaliate or reinvent. Mark Carney, who had recently re-entered public life as an economic advisor, summed up Ottawa's thinking. Canada couldn't fight the US dollar for dollar, but it could outthink it. The solution wasn't retaliation, it was redirection. Instead of chasing Stellantis to Illinois, Ottawa focused on the future: electric vehicles, batteries, and critical minerals. The sectors that would define the next 50 years, not the last 50. And that's where the story takes its dramatic turn. From the ashes of Brampton's closure rose something entirely new: Next Star Energy, a partnership between Stellantis and LG Energy Solution. What started as an apparent corporate betrayal evolved into one of the largest industrial projects in Canadian history. Next Star wasn't just another factory. It was the cornerstone of Canada's new electric vehicle ecosystem. With an investment exceeding 5 billion Canadian dollars, or roughly 4.1 billion US, the Windsor-based facility would produce enough batteries each year to power nearly 500,000 electric vehicles. To put that into perspective, that's equivalent to the annual EV output of an entire European nation. Construction transformed Windsor, once a struggling industrial town, into a buzzing hub of high-tech energy manufacturing. Over 8 million hours of labor went into building the complex, and by early 2024, production began. In just 2 years, Canada had turned a crisis into a comeback. The same company that walked away from Brampton ended up laying the foundation for what is now being called Battery Valley, the beating heart of Canada's clean tech future. But the road there wasn't easy. The United States Inflation Reduction Act changed everything. The IRA offered massive subsidies to U.S. manufacturers for producing EVs and batteries domestically. It was an economic power play designed to pull investment away from Canada and Mexico. And it almost worked. Midway through construction, Stellantis froze work at the NextStar site, demanding Ottawa match the IRA's incentives. It was a tense moment. Billions were on the line. Thousands of jobs hung in the balance. And many believed Canada couldn't possibly compete. But Ottawa didn't blink. After weeks of negotiations, the federal and Ontario governments agreed to a joint support package worth up to $15 billion over 10 years, mirroring the IRA's benefits. It was one of the largest industrial investments in Canadian history, a statement that Canada would compete head-to-head with Washington on clean tech manufacturing. Analysts called it strategic parity. Canada wasn't trying to outspend the U.S., it was proving it could match ambition with precision, and it worked. Stellantis stayed. By mid-2025, the NextStar plant was operating at capacity. Windsor had not only replaced Brampton's lost jobs, it had surpassed them. More than 2,300 new positions were created, alongside an estimated 1,000 indirect supplier jobs. The city's economy, once written off as outdated, was suddenly growing faster than any other in Canada. The transformation was breathtaking. Windsor, Essex, long known for its dependence on the auto industry, reinvented itself as the epicenter of the green energy transition. International investors took notice. South Korea's 𝐷𝐶𝐿 committed $60 million to build its first North American facility near Windsor. Other suppliers followed. Windsor's City Council offered long-term incentives, 99-year land leases, 2 decades of property tax relief, effectively turning the region into an EV magnet. Economists began calling Windsor Canada's Detroit 2.0, but this time, powered by lithium and clean energy, not gasoline and steel. Meanwhile, trade dynamics began to shift. While exports to the United States temporarily dipped due to the transition, trade with Europe and Central Asia surged by more than 20%, the largest jump since before the 2008 financial crisis. As Europe scrambled to find reliable suppliers for clean energy components, Canada stepped into the spotlight. With political stability, environmental credibility, and proximity to both U.S. and EU markets, Ottawa positioned itself as a safe, democratic supplier for the global EV industry. And just like that, a country once viewed as a secondary player became a central hub in the world's clean energy map. Canadian-made batteries began shipping through Montreal's port, bound for car makers in Germany and France. What started as a desperate bid to save jobs evolved into a national strategy for industrial independence. Today, more than $46 billion have been invested in Canada's EV supply chain, supported by $52 billion in public funding, an almost unimaginable scale just a few years ago. And that's what makes this story so remarkable. It's not just about one company or one plant. It's about how a nation turned loss into leverage. Stellantis' decision to move production to Illinois could have broken Ontario's industrial heart. Instead, it exposed the cracks in an outdated economic model and gave Canada the opportunity to build something better. By refusing to panic, Ottawa redefined its relationship with global corporations. It set a precedent. If you want Canadian funding, you must create Canadian value. The lesson was clear. Emotion doesn't build industries. Strategy does. And the result? A thriving ecosystem that stretches from critical mineral mines in Quebec and Manitoba, to cathode plants in Ontario, to global exports through Atlantic ports. Canada is no longer just a supplier of parts. It's a player in the full EV value chain, from raw material to finished battery cell. While the U.S. continues to struggle with policy uncertainty, Canada has quietly built a model of stability, a clean tech economy grounded in trust, precision, and long-term vision. It's ironic, really. Stellantis thought it was walking away from Canada to chase better margins in the United States. Instead, it ended up anchoring one of the most strategic facilities in North America, right back on Canadian soil. Ottawa didn't out-yell anyone, it out-thought them. And maybe that's the bigger story here. Not about competition, but adaptation. Not about anger, but endurance. Because in an era defined by trade wars and supply shocks, the countries that thrive aren't the loudest, they're the smartest. And as the world transitions from oil to electricity, Canada has quietly positioned itself as one of the few nations ready to lead that shift. So, what do you think? Was Stellantis' move to the US really a loss? Or was it the best thing that could have happened to Canada's manufacturing future? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. And if you believe stories like this deserve to be heard, hit that like button, subscribe, and turn on notifications. Because Canada's industrial rebirth is only getting started, and the next chapter may change how the world sees this country forever.